extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is 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 extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Kind of get it there.
Look, I started in the Border Patrol in 1984. I've been at this for over 40 years. I worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. Every president I ever worked for took border security seriously, because you can't have national security if you don't have strong border security. We got to know who's coming in, what's coming in, where's coming in, why it's coming in, right? Even President Obama and President Clinton took some steps to secure the border because they understood national security was important. Joe Biden was the first president in the history of this nation who came in office and unsecured the border on purpose. That's just a fact. We handed the Biden administration, after President Trump's first administration, we handed the Biden administration the most secure border in my lifetime, and he unsecured it on purpose. Now President Trump and this administration here, the success is unprecedented. We beat Trump's first administration on border success. Border numbers are historic low. Today, as I'm standing here, we have the most secure border in the history of this nation. And the numbers prove it.
Hello everybody, today is April 28th. It is about 3:15 Eastern Standard Time here in East Tennessee. So I want to start off with that first video I showed you. That is post done. It was a TikTok video put together of a compilation of that phrase. Dangerous for democracy, extremely dangerous for democracy. See, but what you have to understand, how could that term be coincidentally used by outlet after outlet after outlet after outlet? Right, it's very simple. These media companies and their boards, there are very few of these large media conglomerates. They own these affiliates or the evening news type on the major networks or the morning news, and then the affiliates, right? And then the other companies do that. It is not hard to get your messaging from that corporate board down to the newsroom. Few phone calls, folks. We got to keep saying this, and this is the messaging. And that's how they can try to control the narrative on this issue. But as we saw in the press conference today, in that second video with Tom Homan, he basically states a fact. One of the first things he did, Biden, just get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that, all through EOS, okay? And you have the open border, okay? And they did it on purpose, okay? They have a multitude of reasons why. One, the easy one out of the way, cheap labor, okay? The problem is, especially since the post-Cold War era, we have really created a credentialed class of elites. These elites are disconnected from society, from people, from the masses, from whatever. They don't go to church. They don't have a strong connection to the community. They belong to the global community. They see themselves as global urban centers, urban citizens, okay? Global, not nationalists, right? The trash, they go to church. They believe in more family-oriented. They believe in there are more traditions and so forth. So that's a problem. And what happened is the Democrats purposely, after Obama's election, abandoned the white working middle class specifically, but the middle class policies. The reason why, like Homans says in his speech there, where he said even Clinton, even Obama, because they knew that that issue was important also to those voters. Okay, but when Obama won again, the Democrats thought they don't need that, and they shifted. And that's when a big shift happened, where when I was much younger, the Republican Party had more college educated. The really older were the more conservative, okay? And there's been a flip of that, okay? It is now a working class party, the GOP, and the Democrats are the more of the party of the elites. And that's why you have cities that are really blue. And the shift among these cities in the last 2 election cycles, a little bit more to the right, has been among the minority working class in those cities who are being hurt by these policies from the elites. So what you have to do is you have to dilute that population. Eventually, these people will somehow become a citizen, they hope for. Also, illegal immigrants are counted in the apportionment for congressional districts on the census, which is insane. Well, then why not just count how many people live in Lyon, France? Or the Cameroons? We'll count that as the apportionment. Okay? Now, I can argue, I don't have a problem with someone who's living here long-term on a visa. Maybe it's an engineer working on a 4-year project and he's living here. You want to count him for the census. I don't have a problem with that. Some sort of reputation. He's staying here. He's paying local tax. He's probably sending his kids to the local schools. He's paying sales taxes and so forth. I don't have a problem with that. But they're here legally and they're here on a visa. They don't even have an intent to become a U.S. citizen. Or maybe people here on green cards that are on their way to becoming citizens who came here legally. Don't have a problem with that. Okay? But that's why they have to do this. And it's also going back to the dilution, right? Because if we have more people from all over the world, that dilutes your core traditions, right? If more people here are not celebrating Christmas, if more people here are not speaking English, if more people are here who don't care about our sports, if there are more people here who don't care about, other little traditions that we might do in our daily lives, and that kind of culture, it becomes dilute. And now they're more into, let's say, their Islamic culture or whatever culture they're in, because there's no incentive also in these immigrants becoming assimilated. Because that's not the point. Because then they become Americans. They don't want them to become Americans. They want them to be they are, to dilute that core value of these voters. Okay? And to maintain the power that they have, the credentialed class. Right? That's how it is. So the elites, okay, who don't see themselves as Americans, as I said, okay, so how do I push back against the Trump effect, right? Because Trump came out of nowhere, and that's why he came and was so popular in 2016, because these voters had nowhere to go. And the Republican Party from the 90s, which was either, you would define as a real strong Republican or a more moderate Republican based upon solely the size of the federal government and no other issues aside, like trade, manufacturing. Republicans were much more pro-war as we exited the Cold War. Okay, so these voters had nowhere to go, and then boom, Trump comes along and he gets it. And the Republican consultant class is still beyond it, still going, how are we going to get the the suburban women? Those aren't the same women from 30 years ago. Okay, so when you understand, and that's why these electoral areas are so concentrated in these cities, right? Highly credentialed, they work for bigger corporations, okay? And they just don't have that view. They have that progressive, neoliberal, let's post-Cold War, globalist view. And there's no room for tradition in it. There's no room for any kind of values for it. There's no room for nationalism for it. They don't care about the rest of the country at all. They loathe you, okay? And they want to just empower themselves. What they say, we saw them in action during COVID. I want you to wear a mask, you wear a mask. I want you to take this shot, you take this shot. Okay? I want that factory in China because it'll be cheaper to me. And I need that waiter in my restaurant. And it can't be too expensive of a meal. All right? Because I got to keep those labor costs down. Okay? And while we're at it, we'll try to make some people more dependent. So I have that bureaucracy, that unaccounted, unelected bureaucracy working on my behest, whether it's collusion, agencies colluding with the corporations and the industries they're supposed to be regulating, like in the case of the pharmaceutical industry and the NIH, particularly under Fauci, and the food industry and the FDA, et cetera, et cetera. All right? So these things are all linked because it's all about know your enemy, know who is your enemy. Okay? And when you understand that, you realize these aren't just bullet point issues, but they are all linked in a movement to versus the globalism and populism, okay? And in that is the people, and in our particular case, the Constitution, our traditions, and our individual power and rights versus the unelected institutions, the self-serving credentialed class that has run these institutions and faith in these institutions to the ground. Okay, and many of these are just, you know, like it's a landed class. It's like, I go, my parents went here, I go here, I get this job, I get into the State Department, you know. So that's who it is. So when you understand that, and it is, and because it's globalism, okay, it's not just here in the United States, okay, it's here, I mean, it's in Europe, particularly in Europe, whether it's the European Union and their multinational corporations and the wokeism that they push in Europe. It's the same thing. Because if you see yourself as a global citizen, okay, and not as French or Hungarian, what do you want to do? You want to dilute your population. You're putting your faith in the European Union. You're putting your faith in NATO. You're putting your faith in those things and insane wokeism crap and transgenderism and all that, okay? Because that's about diluting the family. That's about diluting traditional values. Things that went on for centuries are not as important because in order to break that nationalist identity to implement a globalist agenda, I have to suppress that agenda. And I also need the cheap labor. Same issues, but it's the same response. The rise of these parties in Europe, VVD, Vox, National Rally, Reform Party, okay? So it is, Trump, Brexit comes out of this. So, okay, and remember, like in Brexit, it was those voters, you know, in the upper Midlands and the old blue-collar areas, the old labor vote that delivered Brexit. So I just wanted to start with that, and just remember how linked it all is. All right, so this was interesting on the immigration front. They put out signs at the White House today. The media is freaking out about it. It's great. And basically, there you go, all these arrested criminals that are going in. So now, keep in mind what I was saying about it being linked to Europe. This is a broadcast. Holy crap. In England and Wales, there are 150 stabbings a day. What? Think about that. And that doesn't include Scotland and Northern Ireland. Just England and Wales. 150 stabbings a day. You know, they forget about gun control. I wonder that it's risen 90% in a 10-year period. I wonder what has changed so much in the last 10 years. Well, of course there is. It's unfettered immigration from all over the place. So you have gangs, rival gangs, people fighting with native-born English and Welsh people, gangs fighting amongst each other. So you get knife attacks, the police more focusing on them. So traditional crime now goes up. It's a cascading and compounding effect on that. But it's chaos in those neighborhoods while the elites run off with all the power and the money. This weekend, 100,000 people rallied against policies in Ireland. Ireland, if you don't know, has been out of control with their immigration policies. Breaking, thousands of Germans marched in Dortmund today, taking their country back. The world is waking up. I stand with Germany. That's Germany. Boom. Polish election, May 18th. Get to it in a second. Karol Nawrocki. My Poland is a Poland without illegal migrants. It is a Poland where instead of integration centers, there are deportation centers for those who want to destroy our safety. Of course, they want to keep Polish language. They want to keep their heritage in the Roman Catholic Church. They want to keep their language. And they've been good. They've been hosts to Ukrainian refugees. Okay, they're having a battle in their country now between that and the globalists, and Duda, who's running that. From the last election, a big globalist in the EU, is now the Prime Minister of Poland, and then his election coming up May 18th. So, let's take a look at that. Now, there's a second round after the 18th if no one secures 50% in Poland on May 18th. But Trzaskowski, okay, that is the PO party, EPP. The initials on the right are who they group with in the European Parliament, okay? EPP is your globalists, that's your Macrons. That's your Emmanuel Macrons, your Keir Starmers, that's who they are. They're in on this poll at 34%, down 2 points from last round. Nawrocki, they were at the ECR. They would be what I would consider the conservatives, the Republican Party type conservatives, a little more on the right. Definitely not your centrist Republicans, but you know, not your Collins, your Murkowskis, whatever, but your more traditional Republicans. But they're a little more globalists. They are a little Eurosceptic, a little less globalist, the ECR. So Naraki is taking that position, moving to the right on the immigration position and the populist position on that. Okay, now below that is the party, is Mensen. He's at 14 points, down by 6. This is from the last previous poll of this group. Okay, now they partner with PFE, which is the Patriots League. That's who the National Rally is a member of, and I think Vox, for example. And ESN as well. ESN is AfD. They had to form another group with another couple of countries because National Rally did not want to merge with AfD. Issues with going in there, whatever, even though they have the same philosophy. So they lump with them. So right there, you're at 45, 46% of the vote if there's a runoff. So you could get you can get a big victory there in Poland. So we'll be tracking the polls in there, and particularly on this issue. Now Romania, that's coming up. That's the 8th. All right, conservative Simeon, he's up. He also will. Their party is allied with the ECR as well. In anything ECR to the right in European Parliament is much better than the other parties. That's it. So ECR, PFA, ESN are good. S&D, no good. RE, no good. EPP might be less left in terms of domestic economics, but they are highly globalist, and they'll go on board with the wokeism. I don't think they care either way. Okay, they would be the multinationals love EPP. Okay, so this is another election with the second round, so we'll see what happens here. But as you can see, it's just the left parties at the Globalist Party in the middle and the real left parties down here. Okay, but Simeon is clearly to win the first round. And remember, he's not polling to where Georgescu was. Georgescu was high 30s, 38, 39%, but Simeon's getting up there. Okay, now Simeon is from a traditional party while Georgescu is independent. So Simeon's got to get those Georgescu voters back before he was banned from running. We'll start with this tweet. So that video in the last slide was broadcast in the city of Goblan in western Kursk region. It was the last village, town, city, whatever you want to call it, in the Kursk region. So over the weekend, the Russian Federation has expelled all Ukrainian forces from Kursk region. Completely out. Ukraine's still doing the thing in the Volgograd region where they make incursions, but Russia's starting to make real good advances to the north in the Sumy region now going, and that is, I believe they're already 90 kilometers inside the Sumy region. So they're going to consolidate that line and probably put up some additional pressure now and try to get some more pressure on Ukraine to see what goes on, because the European 5-point peace plan, the one is just right off the bat I'll bring up as the non-starter. Western troops as peacekeepers. Dude, one of these things is they don't want NATO troops in Ukraine. So they're not going to go, yeah, NATO troops in Ukraine. Now, maybe Indian troops, some non-interested party, maybe they'll go for some Hungarian troops, something like that. I don't know. That's a non-starter, okay? And for the Ukrainians, the Crimea. And you got to understand, Zelensky's under pressure. What are these nationalists going to do to him if he caves on not recognizing Crimea? Because once they recognize it and they put it in the Constitution, that's it, game over. There's no dispute anymore. Regardless, I mean, it's not going back to Ukraine. It's Russian. But I'm just saying, even from like a domestic legal point of view, that's out of it. Okay? And then they're also agreeing on what the territories there, because Trump said where the lines are in the 4 territories on the day of the agreement versus the actual entirety. Because Russia's got pretty much all Lugansk and has between 70 and 90% of Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Donetsk, depending upon which oblast. I believe Donetsk is the most. I think they're like 85, pushing 90% now. Okay? So, we'll see what happens with that. So, so the key point of this video is the immigration front, what's going on, why the Democrats and the globalists in Europe fight to have these open borders so much, how it affects us, why we need to fight back, and that we are fighting back. And it's the rise of these populist parties that are really driving the force, whether it's the MAGA movement here and all the other parties that I mentioned before, and the strength. And if we can win these, like get this back in Poland, that with Hungary, Slovakia, we got, well, Serbia's not in there, but they're on the same board. You know, even in Holland right now, PVV is, that's Geert Wilders' party, is still the party in power. So you start adding, and then the gains we made in France. There's a by-election, which, if you don't know, is a special election. They call it in the UK a by-election. So it's a special election for, it's going to be the first one since the last election, I believe, significantly. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. That's like, I think this weekend. I think it's on the 1st or the 2nd. So we'll see what happens in that in the UK. But that'll show us where the voters are, because Labour's polling much lower than their share of the electorate. And that wasn't that high. Remember, they only won with 37% of the vote. So you're looking, even though they got 2/3 of the seats, that's first past the post, baby. So, you know, that rise of that populism there, and it's rising. And then the IFD's performance in the election there. Now, they're not getting into government enough. That's why we got to add these countries. So even a big win like Poland would be great. And Romania, it's 2 NATO nations now fighting back against this force. Okay, that's great. Then we can get one of these really big countries, even fantastic. So that's why, you know, I still think the French government's going to collapse, and Macron's going to be forced to hold election. Otherwise, we'll have to wait till 27 for the presidential. But Le Pen is barred, so we'll see where that goes still. I'm keeping an eye on that. So, and also, if you don't know, because I did a preview video on it, is this Saturday is the Australian elections, and check out my preview video on that. And then the Canadian elections are tonight. They're voting as we speak. So last I checked, the poly market was 78% chance Carney is going, I can't say reelected because he just was elected by the party when Trudeau stepped down, will win. I believe that is the case, although I don't believe he will win a majority. I think he'll win a simple majority, and he might have to cobble a small coalition together. And who to watch for that would be Bloc Québécois. They have certain nationalist instincts. They are domestically left, so it would be an interesting coalition for Labour to go in with them. They have done it before. But also look to see if the Conservatives do, because there's some issues the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois can do that. They can come up with some bizarre, you know, traditionally conservative with some populism mixed in with Bloc Québécois and come up with some good policies for them. Anything is better than Labour. But because the Canadians, they're more left than we are. They're more globalist than we are. They are much more faithful in institutions. So the polls close 9:30 Eastern Standard Time here. Now, I don't know if that's a national number going west, but I do remember, obviously, last election, you know, Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia being furthest east, they started a report first, okay? And also keep in mind that because of how these seats or ridings are distributed, Conservatives have to win by like 3 nationally to have a shot, okay? Because of the way the seats are. They're heavily concentrated in Alberta, Manitoba, and places like that. So I'll be keeping an eye on that and tweeting any information on that. Did see one last poll that looked pretty good. It had them up 4, the Conservatives. Okay, so if they go up 4, that could be enough to squeak it out. But we'll see. So I'll be covering that. We'll keep an eye on what's going on in Ukraine. And if you saw this, it's 3 days. He declares a ceasefire, a unilateral ceasefire, 8th to the 10th. That's because the 9th is the Great Patriotic Day, where leaders come and so forth. It's the 80th anniversary of the fall of Nazi Germany. So I'll be keeping on that, tweeting on any peace deals, election updates on Canada, any new poll that comes out, or any major news on the Ukraine battlefront. And, you know, see what's going on with these judge cases and other things like this in the United States. And keep an eye on we can get this damn one beautiful bill. But anyway, you can follow me on my exit at Patriot Planner 1 and on my Getter at Patriot Planner. I also post my videos there. And if you like this video, and I hope you did, please follow, like, and share. All right, have a great rest of the middle of the week until my next video, which I'll probably put out Thursday. All right, have a great night, everybody.